When you look at a map of the United States at night, captured by NASA satellites, something strange jumps out at you. The East Coast blazes like a constellation, New York pulses like an urban supernova, Boston gleams to the north, Miami sparkles to the south. It's one of the most luminous coastal strips on the planet, a corridor of civilization connecting megalopolises in an almost unbroken line of light. But there's an anomaly. Between North Carolina and Georgia, for hundreds of miles, there exists a dark strip. A void. As if someone had turned off the lights of an entire region, leaving only small isolated dots flickering in the darkness. We're talking about more than 300 miles of American coastline, land that should be worth billions, beaches that rival any tropical paradise, a strategic geographic position between the country's major economic centers. And yet, it remains strangely empty. It's not for lack of beauty. It's not for lack of apparent opportunity. So what has kept this coast practically untouched by the explosive urban growth that transformed the rest of the American shoreline? The answer isn't just in geography. It's buried in centuries of history, blood, disease, and a constant battle between human ambition and forces that few dared to challenge. This is the story of a coast that should have been conquered, but never was. The first enemy wasn't human. It was the land itself. Unlike the deep, protected harbors of New York or Boston, the southeast coast is guarded by nature's own fortress system, barrier islands. These are long, narrow strips of sand that run parallel to the mainland, creating a maze of shallow waters, treacherous shoals, and vast salt marshes behind them. Imagine trying to build the next great American port city, only to discover that between you and the ocean lies a shifting wall of sand that moves with every storm. These barrier islands, the Outer Banks of North Carolina, are the most famous, are geological rebels. They migrate, they disappear, they reappear elsewhere. Ships that could safely navigate them one year would find themselves stranded on sandbars the next. Behind these islands, instead of solid ground for city foundations, early settlers found something far more challenging: endless marshlands. Miles upon miles of brackish water, soft mud, and unstable soil that swallowed buildings and roads like quicksand. While New York was blessed with Manhattan's bedrock and Boston had its protected harbor, the Carolina coast offered only uncertainty. Every foundation was a gamble. Every dock was temporary. Every settlement was built on land that might not be there tomorrow. The geography wasn't just difficult, it was actively hostile to permanent civilization. And this was only the beginning of the coast's resistance to human ambition. But there was something far deadlier than unstable ground lurking in those marshlands. An enemy you couldn't see, couldn't fight with cannons or swords, and couldn't negotiate with. An enemy that had been waiting in the swamps for centuries. Disease. The vast wetlands behind the barrier islands became breeding grounds for mosquitoes carrying malaria, yellow fever, and other tropical killers. What European colonists didn't understand was that they were walking into one of the most disease-ridden environments in North America. Rice plantations did emerge along these coasts in the 18th and 19th centuries, but they came with a horrific human cost. Enslaved Africans, who had some resistance to these diseases, were forced to work the deadly marshes while plantation owners fled to higher ground during the fever season, essentially half the year. Cities like Charleston and Savannah managed to establish themselves, but they remained isolated islands of civilization surrounded by pestilent swamps. Unlike the continuous urban corridor that developed from Boston to Washington, D.C., these southern coastal cities couldn't expand. The invisible barrier of disease kept them trapped in their small patches of relatively safe ground. Ship captains spoke in hushed tones about the fever coast. Sailors who survived one voyage often refused to return. Even into the 20th century, before modern medicine and mosquito control, this coastline maintained its reputation as a place where the wealthy visited briefly and the poor died young. The land itself had become a weapon against human settlement. The southeast coast wasn't just fighting disease and geography, it was caught in the crossfire of global war. For over 2 centuries, this shoreline became a contested frontier between European empires. Spanish treasure fleets used these waters as highways to carry New World gold back to Europe, making the coast a target for English privateers and pirates. French explorers claimed portions of the territory, while English colonists pushed south from Virginia. But it was more than European rivalry. Indigenous peoples, the Cherokee, Creek, and dozens of other nations, fought desperately to hold their ancestral lands against wave after wave of invasion. Unlike the relatively quick conquest of coastal New England, the Southeast remained a war zone for generations. The fragmented geography worked against everyone. Spanish forts built on barrier islands would be cut off from supply lines during storms. English settlements would find themselves isolated in hostile territory when indigenous alliances shifted. French trading posts would vanish entirely when rivers changed course. Even during the American Revolution and Civil War, coastal battles here were brutal and inconclusive. Charleston's harbor saw some of the longest sieges in American history. The coastline's maze of islands and marshes made it perfect for guerrilla warfare but impossible to control completely. While the North was building industrial cities and connecting them with roads and canals, the southeast coast remained what military historians call ungovernable territory, land that could be temporarily occupied but never permanently tamed. Every attempt at empire building here seemed to dissolve into the swamps, leaving only scattered ruins and ghost stories. Just when human ambition thought it might finally conquer this coast, nature would remind everyone who was really in charge. Hurricanes. The southeast coast sits directly in what meteorologists call Hurricane Alley, the preferred path of the Atlantic's most devastating storms. But it's not just that hurricanes hit here. It's how the unique geography amplifies their destructive power. Those same barrier islands that made navigation treacherous also acted like funnels for storm surge. When a major hurricane approached, water would pile up behind the islands with nowhere to go, turning the marshlands into inland seas. Entire settlements would simply disappear under 20 feet of saltwater, their foundation scoured away as if they had never existed. The Great Hurricane of 1752 erased entire communities along the South Carolina coast. The Sea Islands Hurricane of 1893 killed over 2,000 people and left survivors with a collective memory of nature's absolute power. Hurricane Hugo in 1989 reminded modern residents that centuries of technological progress meant nothing when faced with 140-mile-per-hour winds. Unlike earthquakes or tornadoes, hurricanes gave settlers time to see their doom approaching. Ship captains would spot the telltale signs days in advance: the sickly yellow sky, the unnatural calm, the way birds fled inland in massive flocks. But there was nowhere to run. No high ground for hundreds of miles. Generation after generation learned the same lesson: you could build on this coast, but you should never bet your future on it. The storms would always return, and they would always win. Today, something strange has happened to this historically empty coast. It's simultaneously more popular and more vacant than ever before. Drive through places like Myrtle Beach or Hilton Head during peak season, and you'll find packed beaches, luxury resorts, and golf courses that stretch to the horizon. Millions of tourists flood these areas every summer, spending billions of dollars on what has become one of America's premier vacation destinations. But here's the paradox: when the sun sets and the tourists retreat to their hotels, vast stretches of this coastline return to an eerie emptiness. Unlike California or Florida, where beach cities merge into continuous urban sprawl, the southeast coast remains a collection of isolated resort islands separated by miles of darkness. It's become a coast of temporary residents, people who visit for a week, own vacation homes they use twice a year, or retire here briefly before hurricanes drive them away. The infrastructure exists to serve millions, but only for a few months at a time. Between the resort clusters, you can still drive for an hour along coastal highways and see nothing but salt marshes, old rice fields, and occasional gas stations that seem frozen in time. It's as if the coast has learned to accommodate human presence without ever truly submitting to it. The land that couldn't support permanent cities has instead become America's most expensive temporary playground, a place where people spend fortunes to visit but few dare to truly call home. In the 21st century, the same forces that kept this coast empty for centuries have found a new weapon: insurance companies. As climate change intensifies, hurricanes and sea levels rise, major insurers are fleeing coastal areas at an unprecedented rate. State Farm, Allstate, and dozens of other companies have stopped writing new policies or abandoned entire regions altogether. The message is clear: the risk has finally exceeded even corporate America's appetite for profit. A beachfront home that might cost $300,000 to buy now requires $15,000 to $25,000 annually just to insure, if you can find insurance at all. Many longtime residents are discovering that their generational wealth is trapped in properties they can no longer afford to protect or sell. The cruel irony is that modern technology has made the coast more accessible than ever. We have air conditioning to beat the heat, medicine to control disease, and early warning systems for hurricanes. But we also have precise actuarial data that proves what previous generations learned through bitter experience: this coast will always be more expensive to inhabit than it's worth. Even wealthy retirees who flock here from the Northeast often retreat after their first major storm. The same families who build million-dollar beach houses frequently abandon them within a decade, unwilling to face another evacuation or insurance premium increase. The empty coast isn't empty by accident anymore. It's empty by economic design, a place where the true cost of living has finally been calculated, and the bill is too high for all but the most desperate or delusional to pay. This isn't just an American story. Around the world, the most beautiful coasts often remain the most empty, and for remarkably similar reasons. Look at the Mekong Delta in Vietnam: stunning coastline, fertile land, but constantly threatened by typhoons and seasonal flooding. The deltas of West Africa offer incredible natural resources but remain sparsely populated due to disease, political instability, and the same kind of treacherous geography that plagued the American Southeast. Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula has vast stretches of pristine Caribbean coastline that remain virtually uninhabited, not because they lack beauty, but because hurricanes, cenotes, and jungle diseases create the same cocktail of risks that kept people away from the Carolinas for centuries. Even in Europe, the most dramatic coastlines, the storm-battered cliffs of Scotland, the shifting sands of the Dutch coast before modern engineering, historically remained empty, while less spectacular but more stable shores developed thriving cities. There's a pattern here that transcends culture and technology. Nature creates its most stunning landscapes in precisely the places that are most dangerous for permanent human settlement. The same forces that carve dramatic coastlines, storms, unstable geology, extreme weather, also make them nearly impossible to tame. The American Southeast coast isn't an anomaly. It's following a universal rule that humans have been learning, forgetting, and relearning for millennia: paradise and peril often occupy the same coordinates on the map. So we return to where we started, that strange dark patch on the satellite map of America's glowing East Coast. But now we understand it differently. This empty coast isn't a failure of human ambition. It's not a missed opportunity or a sign of backward thinking. It's something far more profound: it's a preview. For over 4 centuries, the Southeast coast has been telling us the same story: that some places, no matter how beautiful, no matter how potentially valuable, will always be too dangerous and too expensive for permanent civilization. Every generation has tried to prove this wrong. Every generation has failed. But here's what makes this coast truly prophetic: the same forces that kept it empty are now spreading to places that once seemed permanently safe. Sea levels are rising along the entire eastern seaboard. Hurricanes are growing stronger and reaching further north. Insurance companies are retreating from Miami, from the Outer Banks, from anywhere the mathematics of climate risk no longer add up. The empty coast of the Southeast may not be an exception to America's coastal development story. It may be the first chapter of a new story, one where humans learn, perhaps too late, that our ancestors' empty places were empty for very good reasons. As storms grow more violent and seas continue rising, that dark patch on the satellite map might not be shrinking. It might be growing, spreading north and south, as other coastal communities face the same impossible choice between paradise and survival. Perhaps the empty coast was never behind the times. Perhaps it was simply ahead of them, a glimpse of what's coming for coastlines around the world.